Welcome to Deconversations, a rather excellent podcast if you're listening, and a webinar if you're watching, discussing all things related to medical devices decontamination. Brought to you by Dan Cole, the instrument maker, Matthew Pescott, entrepreneur and former sterile services manager, and Pavel Di Sternberg-Stylovsky, a research and development engineer.
Welcome to Deconversations. Very exciting episode that we have here, and we have Sandra Winter and Danny Cummings from BellyMed who are joining us to talk about a variety of different subjects. And Sandra and Danny, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves, please.
Well, who's gonna start? Me? Okay.
You, Sandra.
Yeah, my name is Sandra. I'm a microbiologist. I've been in decontamination sciences and projects for 9 years now. Studied steam sterilization of dental handpieces in Glasgow, and then came to BellyMed 4 years ago. I'm now leading the applications team, and we're basically responsible for testing, type testing, validation of our washers and making sure that cleaning efficacy, disinfection efficacy, sterilization efficacy is according to the standard. So
Okay.
yeah.
No, that's great. And I know you're involved in other sort of studies around neuro instruments and cleaning of neuro instruments, if that's right. I seem to remember hearing a bit about
that. I did that after my PhD at the University of Glasgow as well, and we looked at residual protein analysis after neurosurgery on different instruments to under the banner of the whole CJD research.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Danny?
Danny Cummings. I'm English, as you can probably tell. I've been living in Switzerland for best part of 20 years now. I come from the buildings industry, so I've been at BellyMed about 5 years. So I'm head of the business unit medical at BellyMed, and I'm really interested to have an open conversation about sustainability, because it's something I think that is inevitable, and I think there are a lot of things that are going to help people. And it's just about getting some awareness out there. So I'm a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, and now I'm trying to pick up some of this medical stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a microbiologist.
Absolutely fantastic. So thank you for the introductions. Sorry, Daniel, I didn't want to cut you off there, but since we've already introduced the subject of sustainability, this is something that for a very long time I wanted to bring to our attention. So it's great that we have two fantastic guests today to explore the subject. But because we have a very sort of diverse audience in our podcast, and as you know, in decontamination sciences around the world, we have people from very diverse backgrounds. I wanted you guys to first initially just introduce the concept of sustainability and try to find how to picture it in the decontamination context, so our listeners get a better feel of how do we actually understand how do we understand sustainability in decontamination.
I mean, I'll kick this off. We had a little chat before. I mean, one of the misconceptions is that it's all about climate change and the environmental impact, which is definitely a big part of it. But it covers so many other things. I mean, it's the whole world. What is sustainable? Are we going to be doing this for many years? The thing I always look at, I'll send you a copy of this, but I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a thing called the Great Acceleration, and it shows what's happened in the world since the 1950s. And there's an exponential growth in everything from GDP to population, dams, fertilizer consumption, you name it. Carbon emissions, methane, and it's all going like this, and basically you can't keep doing it, and that's what sustainable means. And it covers other things like diversity. It talks about poverty, water, and there's all these fantastic numbers around statistics that the 2% of the world's water is drinking water, and it takes, I think, 15,000 liters of water to make a car. So there's all these great things around, and I think that's the main message that I think we need to be aware of, that we can't keep doing what we're doing for the next few years. Otherwise, we're going to have a big problem.
Okay, fantastic. And so in decontamination as an industry sector, where do you see the need for us to discuss sustainability? Why is it specific to sort of our industry that we have to take this subject further?
My opinion is very clear. Hospitals are huge users of everything. They're 24/7 operation. It's not like an office building. So the consumption of water and power, you've got the safety of people, the well-being of patients and staff. All of this leads to the sustainable message. And what I'm hoping for is, and you see it now, is a general awareness. So whether it's an awareness of reprocessing, it's an awareness of what options you have. We talk about single-use scopes or processing scopes. There's all different topics, and I think we should start to look at different options. But the biggest thing for me is hospitals are 24/7, and it's a safety environment, and that's what we need to look at.
Okay, right. Fantastic.
Pavel, just I think a comment I made just before we kicked off is I think the idea of reprocessing instruments anyway is around the sustainability side of things. And we talk about single use devices, and then obviously buzzwords such as the circular economy, and all this fits really nicely into. I mean, Matthew is obviously involved in the chemistry side of things, so we're all in the business of trying to reuse devices. Obviously, that's got to be done safely, hasn't it? And I think leading on to the second question, Pavel, that you have, and obviously in terms of the harm for environment, and I know obviously Danny's alluded to sort of usage of water. What's the technologies looking like in your sector in terms of development, and how these points are being addressed? Sandra,
maybe I can start answering that. I mean, obviously washer disinfectors and sterilizers use up a lot of energy and water, but it's there's room for improvement in every part of those. So I think people tend to underestimate small savings. For example, if you have a process that is 2 minutes faster, you might think, what about those 2 minutes? But if you calculate it up to a week, a month, a year, you might actually save a lot in terms of energy for heating up the water, or just process time, electricity, whatever. So the saving you might get out of it is potentially substantial. So I think even small improvements on the cleaning process or a sterilization process might actually make a very big difference.
So sometimes, obviously, when you're talking about, and obviously from my point of view, understanding things like when you put car in the most ecological mode, if you like, it's generally slower and steadier. And it's not always about trying to do it the quickest way, is it? Because obviously that can lead to potentially waste energy. So is it the same from a decontamination point of view, like to have different modes for sustainable settings for washer disinfectors and sterilizers?
Yeah, I think it's important to have sort of depending on the application. For example, if I want to clean and disinfect shoes in my washer disinfector, like from the theater, that doesn't require that much water or time until it's clean and disinfected to a level that is safe. But if you have minimal invasive surgery instruments, you have to be really sure that it's, so that might take a bit longer and will use more water or more time. So I guess it depends on what it is you want to decontaminate. Like, for example, there are several countries who say, no, we just want the same cycle and we put everything in this one because we know it works, and then we're just done with it. We just have to validate that one cycle once a year and then we're done, which is a cost saving in terms of validation, because they have to pay less because they validate fewer cycles. But that is not really, it might not be a proper balance, because they might save more money if they have more different processes validated, and they can save a lot of time and water and electricity. And
Sure.
Now, one thing that I picked up on here is, and I think this is really critical to get out from this as a lesson, is that we underestimate the little changes and the little improvements that we can do. And this is exactly where I think, with the diversity of instrumentation and the equipment that are going through the reprocessing cycle, this is where we have to be quite clever about how we design processes for those different instruments, because as Sandra said, for different types of different classes of devices or equipment that you reprocess, you might need different cycles, and that's where those savings come into play. And then you add to that the question of how much chemistry you're using, whether you always have to reprocess things at higher temperature, because what you mentioned, the water heating is one of the sort of more energy intensive parts of any decontamination process, whether it's sterilization or cleaning. Having clever ways of utilizing water and those processes is definitely an area where we can improve. And it's interesting because Dan, you were interested in looking at the comparison between, let's say, the route of single-use instruments versus reprocessing in general. So Danny and Sandra, how do you see that sort of evolving towards us being more sustainable in general?
I mean, I think the point you mentioned before is important, because it's all about the awareness that people have. And if you educate people that, this is how you load a machine, or this is how you should group different application types, and you have all these different programs in a machine, then it's these small things that can be achieved. I think if you look at there's an open argument about single use against reprocessing. My argument would be, all right, I work for a manufacturer of washers, but you can't have a circular economy really, unless you recycle these single-use machines. And my argument against, from a sustainable message, would be, if you're transporting thousands and thousands of single-use devices or instruments, and then you've got to dispose of these, so then the safety bit comes in. How does that balance up against the water and the power and the chemistry that you use to reprocess? So I think there's probably, it's horses for courses. There's probably equipment that's perfectly suited for single use, no problem. To go the complete whole way, I don't see that. It's a bit like the car, the electric car. There's more and more electric cars now. One of the arguments back in the day was, how much fossil fuels are you using to generate the electricity to power these electric cars? Nowadays, we're complementing the power sources with non-fossil fuels, so wind and solar and things like this. So I think you need to look at the whole package. I think definitely there's a application for single use, but for me, I think the better way would be to take the standard reprocessing, but be a lot more clever, maybe load dependent, how we use this. And if you educate people just to make small adjustments, then I think you can achieve improvements.
Danny, you said packaging, like the whole package just now. That actually triggered a thought in my head. It's also about packaging. Single-use instruments will be packaged probably individually very often. So I guess it's a lot of, there is production costs, and then there is the packaging, and then you can only use them one time. And then you have to dispose of said packaging and the instruments themselves, and it has to go into a probably quite expensive waste stream. Disposing of clinical waste is expensive. So yeah, I think and also in terms of the small changes, people, I think, often don't see an imminent benefit. But when they hear, oh, you can save XYZ amount of money when you buy single-use instruments, that's something they can relate to. But thinking about sustainability in the long run when small changes are happening, I think often people don't really see that, like the ultimate outcome at the end of the day.
One of the things that in all engineering industries, everything's over-engineered. So I mentioned before, my previous business was in heating, cooling, air conditioning. You always put excess air, excess combustion efficiency there. You size the plant on the coldest day and the warmest day in the summer. So that design consideration is very important. And the concept of value engineering, I don't think has ever fully been embraced. And nowadays you have technologies, and the technologies can help you to be perfectly efficient. And the idea that, well, we'll chuck it all in and run a standard cycle, I think, can be improved.
Okay.
Absolutely.
No,
talking about. Sorry, Dan. Go on.
No. I was just going to, because obviously we're talking about how efficient we can get the devices to reprocess, and I just wanted to bring Matthew in just around, because I was thinking around the chemistries, and we talk about efficiency of pre-cleaning, don't we, and how important that is, and obviously that's got to make the washer disinfectors jobs a lot easier, Matthew, isn't it? And I know obviously you've seen some improvements and changes in those products over the years.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the washer disinfector is very much reliant on the cleanliness of the instrument that it's trying to clean. So, obviously, if the blood and soil has been allowed to dry on the instruments in theatres, we don't really have any control how long that sort of soil's been sitting on the instruments. And in my experience, blood, especially, can dry like concrete. And the thing is, with even with the best washer in the world, if the blood has been allowed or the soil has been allowed to dry on hard, then it is very difficult to remove with a normal wash process. You can have obviously more intensive cleaning, but I made some notes while we were chatting, and my concern is that most SSDs, as was mentioned earlier, just want a single cycle. They don't want multiple cycles. I've always been a fan of multiple cycles because you have heavy loads, you have light loads, but apparently their staff just can't cope with thinking more beyond more than one cycle. Going back to Dan's questions with regards to pre-cleaners, the good news is that the pre-cleaners have improved in time, and there's quite a few studies now that have shown that if you keep instruments moist, you stand a far better chance of getting the instruments clean. The problem with a lot of the pre-cleaners is they tend to have surfactants that will foam, and because of a washer disinfector standard pre-wash, you do tend to find that the foam and the cold water are not a good mixture, leading to cavitation in the pre-wash. So the good news is that pre-cleaners are improving in time, and if as long as they're manufactured to have the wash process in mind, then they can work really well.
But this is an example. I was going to say, this is what we see in the there are markets in the US, which is one of our biggest markets. It's almost exclusively pre-treatment, pre-cleaning. They put ultrasonic baths in, and they're able to then reduce the wash cycle because it's it's already been pre-treated. Whereas you take most of Europe, they just chuck it all in because they rely on the efficacy of the washer. And again, this is something where I'm relatively new compared to you guys to this industry, and I wonder why there is such a diverse specification on how to clean what are essentially the same instruments. And the other example is validation, where we had some discussions at the WFHSS. You have the visual indicator method, which is mostly in the US and parts of Europe and Asia, and then you've got the sort of selected European regions who do a full day validation once a year, and then you have the UK, it has to do four times a year validation. So it's such a wide range of specifications for what is the same machine. So I wonder what your comments are on that.
Sorry to jump in here. It's not just the same machine, it's the same outcome.
So process, yeah, exactly.
Ultimately, everyone wants to achieve the same result, right? But everybody takes sort of a different route.
Precisely for that reason, we had this issue about defining what that end goal is, and I think that is the core of the problem that we have around the world. That because we don't have a unified system of measuring and assessing cleanliness, we have those different approaches to it, and that's where all of it comes from. And there's another layer on top of that, because at the end of the day, everything is about management of the risk to patients. So who assigns specific risk or specific level of risk to certain activities will be able to later on justify one route against the other. But I think that it's quite interesting that we are talking about, the problem of evaluation of what is actually needed, where in all of the countries we talked about, we basically have exactly the same equipment, but you have to then think, how do I then make this equipment fit certain standard or certain way of doing things? So that, I think, is one of the issues. And I think that coincidentally, the sustainability of systems is something that is going to come into play a lot more, and is going to impact the way we assess not only cleanliness, but how do we assess the processes in general. This is going to be the element that is going to come into play, and it would be quite interesting to learn from you. How do you see us going from where we are now in terms of the assessment of the performance and assessment of the sustainability of particular solutions? Maybe we are talking more about the technical aspects, so environmental impact, and the use of energy, the use of chemistry. How do you see that developing? How do you see that part of technology being further on implemented in washers and sterilizers?
For me, there's some obvious ones. I mean, you can track the performance in terms of the kilowatt hours, the water consumption in liters, the dosage of chemistry. That's fine. You can look at process times. I mean, the key here is this, cool word about benchmarking, because if I tell you a machine uses so much kilowatt hours and so many liters of water, it doesn't have any real value, because you don't know in what context, which application you're using, what's the how much do you pay for water, how much you pay for power in that region. So you need to benchmark it against something else before it can have any meaning. And then you've also got to put it into a context where people can understand it. If I say one washer is going to use 14,000 liters of water a month, most people can't really grasp what that's like. You need to say, well, that's like 15 swimming pools, or it's the Lake of Zug, or whatever you want to call it. So you need to put it into a context where people can understand. And the final point of that is you need to then say, because it still doesn't mean anything, you need to say, if you was to put this storage tank in place, or if you were to reduce your cycle time by 2 minutes, this is the impact you can have. And then people will start to understand the impact that these machines, and then you have 10 machines, that can have on the environment, or even the costs. I mean, it's an economic issue as well.
Okay, Sandra.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that one big part that has to happen more than it already does in the future is, and that's less the technological side of things, but more education. I think if people understand what Danny just said, for example, if they understand what an impact small savings can have, or if they understand, when I work in a CSSD and I don't understand why I'm using this cycle for that load, and if they don't understand what the concept is and what the importance is and what the requirements are for the individual types of load or the instrument or whatever, it will be difficult for them to make the right decision and to also consider the outcome. And also, Matthew, what you said about pre-treat sprays, I totally agree with you. We tested a lot of them. Some of them foam so much that there is actually cavitation, others don't, but there is no standard on how to design a pre-treat spray and what they have to do or what they shouldn't do. So it's looking at the whole concept. And to be honest, I'm not sure, and I'm just putting that question out there, if CSSD-A uses a pre-treat spray and a really short wash cycle, and CSSD-B uses no pre-treat spray at all, but a longer wash cycle. Which one is the more economic one?
Well, yeah. Ironically, I have some evidence of that.
Oh, cool.
There's a little machine I sell for testing the presence of protein on the surface of instruments.
Pro Reveal. I know. I've done a lot of work with that.
Well, I was trying not to mention it, seeing as we're a non-commercial podcast, but thank you. And there was 2 sites in a certain part of the UK. One site was doing pre-cleaning and the other site was not doing any pre-cleaning. The site doing the pre-cleaning was getting excellent results, zeros, and it proved from their perspective that pre-cleaning had a beneficial effect. I went to the other site where they weren't doing the pre-cleaning. They were putting the instruments straight into the machine. The difference between the two sites were only the fact they weren't doing the pre-cleaning. They had very similar machines, very similar cycles. So they hadn't sort of compensated by the fact they weren't doing the pre-cleaning. And that was shown in the results. They had a much higher loading of protein on the instruments after cleaning, after the wash process. But interestingly, it wasn't their fault. It was my machine wasn't, recording the protein presence properly. But I did point out to them it was exactly the same machine that was used on both sites. So,
but what were the cycles?
Sorry, go
on. The cycles, were they exactly the same cycle times and whatnot?
Yeah. So basically, one of the problems I find in the UK, well, two problems I find in the UK. All the cycles are fairly identical around the country, and maybe Danny can come in on this in a sec. Where basically they don't take into it. So say a belly med washer is put in one part of the country and put in another part of the country. There doesn't seem to be any thought to the local conditions, such as the pressure or the water quality. They all seem to be set up ideally the same. And you get the same with the chemistries. Often they won't use the manufacturer's recommended chemistry, but they will use a chemistry that has come from the cheapest local supplier. There's no optimization. They literally will take the bottle and then just put it on the machine. So
that's exactly right. That's what we see in all regions. And I mean, one other topic about the performance of equipment is also you have to compare it over the whole life of the equipment. What are the life cycle costs? And we see a big, the last few years we've seen a big change of that. People are not just looking at capital costs; they're looking at the costs over the life. And a really good example is the this European EU labeling system that you get for fridges and cars and things like that, where you have this A+, B, C, and now we don't have that in our industry, but we have a sister company that makes these white goods, and about 80% of all their products are A and above. So there's definitely a value in having energy efficiency, but only if you compare it over the life. And to take your point, Matthew, I think the local infrastructure is a really big part of that, because the water quality on its own. I've seen washers in the US where I first joined the company, and I thought, wow, that's a cool, like a big cart washer, and I thought, wow, you've got a white door. How cool is that? and it was all calcium. It was just completely clogged up. It was white, and so again, that's going to affect the efficiency. And then you got, as you say, the chemistry. I mean, there are low-cost chemistry providers, and I don't get. I mean, it's what you said before about risk management and the risk to patients. Do you really want to take the chance of, Yeah, there's a fella down the pub that could get me some parts from eBay and do your maintenance. But this is what, is what we hear sometimes. And I just think, going back to the sustainability topic, if it can generate an awareness of the efficiency and the safety of what we're trying to do, then it's only a good thing.
There's one sort of comment that I think will wrap up this discussion as such. The one thing that comes out of it very clearly as an uptake, I think, or as a conclusion, is the fact that if you have means of measuring that impact, then you can do something about it, because this is, I think, the critical element. If you start measuring that impact, whether it's the energy use, whether it's the chemicals, whether it's the cleanliness of instruments, or the use of chemistries in general, if you don't measure it, you don't know. When you start measuring, you can then actually do something about it. So it does seem that as a general rule of thumb is, once you start measuring things and seeing where you are, that's the way to optimization and better results in general. Would you agree with that approach?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree as well.
Yeah.
I also think, though, that we still have to create some more awareness for more people to jump on that wagon, because yeah, it's I see a lot of times in CSSDs certain processes, and I'm like, well, why is it that long? I mean, you could optimize it. You have excellent chemistry, you have, validation shows you that the stuff is clean after 7 minutes, but why do you do 10 or 12 minutes? And then we hear, well, we've always done it this way. So
yeah, there's definitely a historical aspect to
absolutely.
to
And I think, again, education, creating awareness, important.
So the question is on this particular topic, how do we do it? How do we do this subject, even take from this podcast? What can we do in general to take that message for others to consider what we've just discussed? What can we do? How that education can be applied on a daily basis? What can we all do?
I mean, sustainability, you can influence it in three ways. You can do it at the corporate level, so companies like ours and yours can share that message. We can implement efficient machines or processes or recycling systems. Our factories, we're starting to do that now. So the corporate level is probably the easiest one. There's a new level that you'll start to see now, and that's the finance and the banking and the insurance levels. So these companies are now prioritizing investments into green, sustainable companies and projects that have a reduced impact on the environment. And that's a fact. I don't come from the banking industry, but if you check it, they've all got these huge focuses on sustainability. But the ultimate way of doing it is governance. And you need the UK government or the European Union to say, or the global WFHSS, these people, you need them to come up and say, this is the new standard and it's got to be in place by whatever. And I have a really good example. I live in a town in Switzerland, and we were talking about this before. I came here 20 years ago, and I went to the supermarket and I was looking for dustbin bags. I couldn't find them, so I asked the girl at the checkout where are the dustbin bags, and she said, I've got them here. And they charged me, she said, 10 plastic bin bags cost me 35 francs. So about 25 quid. It's like 25 quid for 10 dustbin bags. What kind of country have I moved to? But what they do is they take everything else here in this country for free. You can put your cartons, your plastic, your PET bottles, aluminium, all these things, you can recycle them for nothing, which means you only put the necessary things into this ridiculously expensive plastic bag. Within a week, it was just normal practice, and I've been doing that for 20 years. So I think governance is the way forward. If you want to have people to be more safe, more efficient, use the right processes, use the right chemistries, then we need to get it as a standard rather than just as an option.
No, absolutely.
Pavel, just it seems to me a lot of these, and I've just been listening in for a few minutes, a lot of this, a training program, wider education. It seemed that has to be part of the answer for the sustainability. And there's also other things as well that haven't been mentioned. One of the things, there's a bit of a passion of Pavel's and mine, is sort of fixation on sets and positioning of devices and instruments before they go into the washer disinfectors. So there's all these different factors. And I know we've mentioned about single-use devices, and of course there will be some certain devices that will only really, or should only ever be fit for single use, because if they can't be cleaned properly. So there's so many of these different factors, aren't there, that to be considered. But overall, I think get education, and obviously, unfortunately, we've not had these physical conferences moving forward. But this seems to me to be a necessary thing to plan for the future, for ongoing, so people are aware of all these issues. Obviously, Pavel, I think we're also looking at bottlenecks, aren't we? And really, what's preventing sterile services moving forward? And that, again, that education thing seems to sort of sit there as a major part of that. Would you agree?
From my perspective, one thing that I'll add to it is that education, I think, is absolutely critical. And on one hand, we can talk about the governance and having the right standards, but this is again simply saying to people, you have to do this. But people, especially those subtle changes that we are talking about, I think that without the understanding from the bottom up, what are the reasons for it? Why are we doing things in a certain way? Is going to make that a process really difficult. We've been through the process of imposing the limits on the protein on surgical instruments, and we've been, it's 5-6 years now since that started, and that just it wasn't a nice, easy, smooth change. And you sort of think about it almost from the outside, you think, this is fantastic. We finally have a goal to achieve, but there was so much backlash simply because there was no education based on facts and the understanding of what that actually means to people. So I think that this is absolutely critical, what Sandra was talking about, getting the education to the level that people start understanding why we are doing those things, why we are changing, why do we need to change. And I think that this is another element that just simply telling someone to change is one avenue, but explaining to them why do we need to change is another. And from the scientific and technical point of view, we can definitely ask the question to our guests now, what bottlenecks do you see now at the moment in sterile services that are actually stopping us from making that step towards more sustainable processes and practices?
I mean, education is definitely a big part, and education is included in these United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We should get everybody access to good education. I know your context, it was about knowledge about working with the facility and the machines, but I think giving people education is an important social element. In terms of bottlenecks, I mean, particularly right now with the whole COVID situation, hospitals are a little bit, fighting for cash. They're spending a lot of money, they're not getting a lot of elective surgeries, and that's always the number one roadblock. People think, well, I don't want to invest into this because I've got a business to run. But it's been proved that you can look at it as a differentiator. If hospitals show people how the processes they've put in place to reduce risks, to keep the staff and patients safe, and again, if you can implement things to save money, whether it's 2 or 3 minutes on power supply or water reduction or chemistry reduction, then it should pay back anyway, particularly over 10-15 years. So I think those two topics, education and the economy, they're the two big roadblocks. But people have proved now with a certain amount of innovation that you can become very profitable and use it as a differentiator.
All right, excellent.
And Danny, just quickly to pick up on your point around governments, interestingly, we're potentially going to be involved as a company in a circular economy project, and we were doing a bit of research on different UK hospitals' websites and where sustainability seems to be prioritised and where it's mentioned, and it's still very, very hard to find much evidence that it really is high up on the agenda. So just shows the importance. Obviously, if you get the buy-in of the organisation overall, then it's going to filter down, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we did a certain amount of surveys with some of our customers, and for our customers, it does sit very high on the priorities. Again, how much of that is actually implemented into the daily life of a CSSD, that's your challenge. But I think certainly people are more aware of it now. But people are not, as I said at the very beginning, they're not aware of how broad a topic it is. And you know, you have this whole Black Lives Matter thing. That's a diversity topic. So and there's the young Swedish girl that's campaigning against climate change. So there's a movement there. But I think you can't look any further than the safety, and that's what the hospitals are there for. You know, you have one problem. We talk about these protein residues left on instruments. You know, you have one death or a problem in a hospital that can shut the whole thing down. So that for me has got to be the main topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also part of, or maybe one element that creates a roadblock. People, I think, are afraid of something happening, which is maybe why they feel more comfortable with sticking to what has worked for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, when you say that our customers are interested in sustainability and that, I think that's excellent. And I also agree that there is a movement starting, and basically in every industry you can see some sort of change towards sustainability. But I also think that people need a little nudge sometimes. Maybe they don't start looking at it just out of their own because they lean back one day and feel bored and think like, oh, we could do something with sustainability. You know, sometimes they need a little push, be that a presentation or education or whatever.
Sure, brilliant. Pavel, would you like to, you got the final question there?
Yeah, the last question. I think that this discussion leads very nicely to it, because I would like to get back to the subject of technologies and solutions. And I was wondering whether you could shine some light on what sort of technologies and solutions would you like to see in the future being developed for sterile services that will take that one step forward, that will make processes, the environment in sterile services more sustainable. And that's across the whole range of topics that we've discussed. But I wanted to sort of focus on the technologies and solutions of the future that you think are going to get us where we need to be.
We're running a project at the moment, looking at what CSSD of the future would look like, and we got a lot of ideas, and this is kind of the fun thing about it. No, I think from my experience, I'm relatively new to this business, but it's quite a mature industry. You know, you still have machines with pieces of paper coming out of them with the batch reports on them. So I think you could. The whole digitalization is going to be a key topic. Having data, not just to show what you've processed, but also about the equipment. Early warnings and things like this. So I think that's one big topic. I'd like to look at these efficiency standards. As I said before, if we could have like an EU labeling scheme to say that machine is an ABC rated, I think that would go a long way. I think some benchmarking in terms of water consumption, power, chemistry dosing will definitely help. And then final thing for me would be, maybe the way that you transport the equipment around a hospital. We have some sites with robotics in there, but I think there's definitely a way to improve the way you move the machines around or move the instruments around. But there's a ton of ideas out there, and it's great that people are thinking that way now.
Excellent. Sandra?
Totally agree. I think digitalization is a very big element. Like in many other industries, machines are a lot more advanced already than washer disinfectors that are sitting in CSSDs usually are. So I think digitalization is definitely something that is important and that will be sort of coming in CSSDs as well a lot more. Yeah, and automation, I think, especially in terms of ergonomics, like obviously when you work in the dirty area of a CSSD, there are sets that are really heavy, and people have to like take them from the bottom shelf and pull it up and stuff like that. So I think it would be nice to make life easier for those people as well.
No, that's absolutely excellent. I think that digitization is definitely going to change the way we use data from the processes, because for the first time I think that we'll be able to go back to the subject we've discussed a few minutes ago about actually measuring the impact. Because once you have data, you can see, you can do the benchmarking and find out whether there are things that can be improved, just because you started measuring it, you started scrutinizing how the resources are utilized. So from that perspective, certainly that is the step forward. And I'm really glad that you mentioned, Sandra, the subject of ergonomics and thinking a little bit more about what we can do to make the repeatable tasks, especially those that require or that are difficult or require heavy lifting, and so how we can make them simpler. But then there is also the element that I'm always sort of keeping in the back of my head, that there needs to be a further degree of automation of what we do, simply so we can get to the level that we get data from those processes, because we still very, very heavily rely on processes that are fully manual. Be it transportation, be it assembling sets and so on. And that is really where we can capture quite a lot of efficiency, think about more about the way we load things. And we've been discussing subjects of specific baskets, for example, for instruments, to help on one hand the cleaning processes, but on the other hand help the technicians when they assemble them, so it makes it a little bit more intuitive, so we don't also rely on simply people remembering how a particular set looks like, but actually having more help in putting them together. So having those little steps that take us closer to being more sustainable.
Excellent. And sorry, Sandra and Danny, just a question that's come up as Pavel was talking, and in my head was, are there any European countries that you would say are sort of leading the way with this, as the sort of CSSD of the future? And I know from an instrument perspective, the Dutch, for instance, I think mandate fixation in certain sets, which, I mean, obviously, are there challenges you'd like to put back to, for instance, to the surgical instrument manufacturers? And so there's a couple of bits there, if you could consider those.
I don't think there's any clear leader. I think that one of the problems we talked about earlier is there's such a diverse scope in terms of how we process these instruments today. So I think all regions have got their own unique focus areas. I think one of the goals in the future would be to try and bring them together. And I think we working with people like yourselves and just getting that network expanded, and I think these conferences and these global organizations definitely help. I don't think a global standard is going to come anytime soon, but we can certainly get closer to it, and we've already said sharing the information and the data is the easiest way to get there, I think.
Fantastic. Sandra?
Yep, agree. I mean, for example, in endoscopy reprocessing, the Netherlands are really strong. It's sort of bits here and there. Some countries focus on one thing more and others on another thing more, like process time, chemistry usage. I think every country has sort of their little thing that they want to optimize most. So I agree with Danny, being more transparent across all these countries, having digitalization and whatnot will eventually, I mean, it's going to be a process, but will eventually sort of give everyone a better understanding of what the options are and where we can improve.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that's great. Thank you very much for your time. It's been excellent, really, really interesting. Before we sign off, I don't know if you've got anything else you'd like to add, but I think that's been really, really interesting and exactly what we want to hear about sustainability in the future of CSSD.
No, thanks for setting this up. It's been very interesting.
Yep.
Thank you very much. It's definitely been an insightful discussion, and one that I'm hoping that we'll get back to, and we'll have more opportunities to discuss better solutions and steps that will take us closer to being more sustainable. So thank you very much, guys, for being here.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you,
inviting
guys.
us.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Deconversations. Join us soon for new episodes.